Hi, this is Kinnear, and welcome to another Starfield video. This is going to be my review of Starfield Reviews with a little bit of financial information up front. I did a live stream last night just playing Starfield like I normally do, and I took the last few minutes of that live stream and I talked a little bit about the negative content that I have seen on YouTube and other platforms around Shattered Space, which I think also reflects on Starfield as well. And I've gone into the details of where I'm seeing that negative content and what I think some of the motivations are and what's driving that in the live stream. And I'm going to include that short clip at the end of this video. But I did want to provide some background from a financial perspective, or at least a user install-based perspective that I've seen so far with the game. And so I'm going to do that here. Hopefully that won't take too much time. I have some charts, which is kind of the thing I do. But I was going to put up a real quick blurb. There's a site called True Achievements, which has some nice data on Starfield and Shattered Space. And they're reporting some positive data. And I think they're pretty consistent on their Xbox reporting. They do rankings as well. And they recently reported that Starfield was back in the top 10 on the Xbox platform. So I want to highlight right off the bat that a lot of this discussion revolves around the fact that this game was released on PC and Xbox, but not PlayStation at the time that it was released. But I'm going to run through a couple of slides here. One of the things that I look at up front in this game is the sales numbers that have been reported to us over time. And the important one that I use as a baseline is early September. After the game first launched, we were told that 6 million players had installed the game and were playing the game. Now, that is across Xbox and Steam numbers as well. And I don't want to get hung up on the fact that if you're on Steam, you paid for the game outright, and then you could install it and play it. And if you're on Xbox, you may have gotten the game through Game Pass, which some people will claim is not a sale, but that's really more of a financial and accounting issue on the back end. If you are playing on Game Pass, you are paying for the game. You may not pay at the same rate and over the same period of time. That's a different issue entirely, which I'm not going to cover in this video. So I'm just going to consider those installations and plays for the number of players that are out there. And what I did was I calculated the days since launch, and I looked for other places where we have seen sales data or player data reported. And what I noticed is that in early December, I have an article that says there were 10 million players by early December, which is a pretty good growth rate. And I did a quick calculation on that in 86 days and came up with about 46,000 new players per day after the baseline of 6 million. So every time you see me reporting here in this far right hand column, new players per day across all time, I am taking out the first 6 million. So what I'm doing is I'm saying, okay, a group of people bought the game or installed the game right off the bat when they could. And then we see later numbers of players. How many players are we seeing come on every day after the initial install? Because I think that's the important part. We saw at the end of December on the 20th, 13 million reported at 104 days, which is a very nice growth rate, a high growth rate during 2023, very consistent with what is reported in the press and in a couple of other places that we're talking about how well the game was doing. At the same time, we know there's this rising voice of people complaining about the game. I will talk about that in the live stream excerpt that I put in later. On June 16th, I believe it was middle of June, there was an interview with Todd Howard that was published on YouTube with a very large YouTube content creator. At that point in time, Todd Howard reported to us that there were 14 million players with an average of 40 hours of playtime each. Now, we can look at the math and assume that some of those players played a lot less than 40 and some of those players played a lot more than 40, but the average is 40 across 14 million players. And for simple reasons in the United States that relate to the Securities and Exchange Commission, Rule 10b, things like that, I don't believe Todd was misleading us. I think that would be a very low value move on his part. So I'm going to take the 14 million as the minimum that it could have been. He could have reported lower than the actual numbers that he knew about, and that would be perfectly fine. If he tried to report higher and that had an impact on stock price or something like that, somebody could give him some trouble over that. So I think the 14 million is fine and I'm comfortable with that. And so I did the calculation again, and at that point in time, taking out the 6 million to start with, we're looking at about 28,000 new players or installations per day happening. Now, what we don't have is what happened on September 30th when Shattered Space dropped. And we don't know where it is right now, about mid-October. So I did a little bit of calculation work here and I said, okay, what's my bare minimum number? I took the last 2 data points and said, what's the growth rate just between those? And so the low end I put at 5,500 new players per day. And I'm going to call the top end the all-time, like the general average of 28,000. And the result of that is that my calculations at this point in time are that there are somewhere between 14.5 million players, which would be the lowest end I would see, and maybe upwards of 17 million players for Starfield at this point. And that's relevant when we start to look at other games. And I'm going to do some comparisons to two other games that are commonly compared to Starfield for a variety of reasons, but I'm not going to get into too many details on them because each game does kind of stand on its own, but we have complicating factors like some games are released on all three platforms, PC, Xbox, and PlayStations, and some aren't, right? So one of the games that's often compared to Starfield in a variety of ways, not just the sales numbers, is Cyberpunk 2077, but I think it's a great comparison to make over time because Cyberpunk 2077 was released in late 2020, and we have reported sales data of 13 million sales, and I believe that's across all three platforms. That's PlayStation, Xbox, and PC. And it's worth noting at this point in time, and I don't have perfect data, but Statistica, I think is the name of the site, Statistica, something like that, reports that the monthly average users on PlayStation Network is well over 100 million, 116 million, I think is what I saw. So it's a very, very large gamer install base. Xbox comes in around 34 million, so maybe what, 30% of PlayStation, and Steam is a much larger install base of PCs, but the number of games that we see selling on Steam is different. But for Cyberpunk, it launched in 2020 at 13 million, and the Phantom Liberty DLC was released in very late 2023, right after Starfield. And I'm not going to talk about whether I think either one of those cannibalize each other. I don't think it's relevant at this point, but it's possible. But what we do know is that the Phantom Liberty DLC feels like the real inflection point for Cyberpunk, where everybody looked at it and said, wow, it's amazing, and they've really turned things around, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to point out two things. One, it was 1,000 days after the launch date. And two, the launch of Cyberpunk 2077 was really bad, I guess, on some levels. Like PlayStation pulled it, according to the Wikipedia article, for 6 months off of their network because of the problems they were having. So they clearly had problems. They clearly put the work in, and they clearly released a tremendous DLC that was very popular. And by October of 2023, shortly after Starfield and Baldur's Gate and a bunch of other good games came out, they were reporting 25 million sales. So that's useful information. But I wanted to use that so that I could calculate the same way I did for Starfield. What was their average daily new installation rate compared to their baseline? And it's about 11,662. So if I take 25 million sales of Cyberpunk 2077, and I'm assuming everybody bought the DLC and kind of made the next step, might not be true, and I take away the 13 million baseline sales, and I just do a calculation on the number of days that have passed, they draw about 11,000, 12,000 new players per day. And I'm going to go back to this chart on Starfield and say, Starfield, in my view, is somewhere between 5,600 players per day and 28,000 players per day. If Cyberpunk over a 3-year period ended up around an average of 11,000, and if Starfield ends up in that same average, I'm not seeing a huge difference, and so I'm not going to worry about it that much. Again, that feeds into my projections of Starfield maybe having 17 million players right now, maybe having 14 million players. The other thing I looked at was the number of concurrent players on each one of these games, and I included Fallout 4 in this one for comparison as well at launch. And this is info from steamdb.info. And if we look at Cyberpunk 2077, which we know had a rocky launch, I think they peaked at 1 million players. That was their highest concurrent player count. It's just huge, great numbers. Starfield's numbers were a third of that, 330 something thousand, something along those ranges. I don't feel comfortable comparing those to each other across that much time, right? So I can't look at it and, like, if Starfield had launched in 2020, the same month or around the same time as Cyberpunk, and you wanted to compare them head to head, I would be more comfortable doing that. Launching 3 years later is different. The entire landscape changes, and especially launching on different platforms and not including the PS5, which I know isn't in the SteamDB database, but I think that was difficult. What I did want to look at was how much of their player count did they retain 1 year later. And Cyberpunk 2077, with its rocky start, had a player count of 2.87% of the player count it had at its peak, right? So it was a considerably lower number. Starfield was at about 4.2%. So if Starfield was at 330,000, just call it 300,000, and they're at 4.2% of that 1 year later, that gives you something to compare on. And then Fallout 4, which I think is a special case because the Fallout franchise has been out there for so long, and we're talking about Fallout 4. Like this is a major release, but it's one of multiple releases with a huge fan base. Was at 8.5, but it gives us, I think, some pretty interesting data to look at in comparison. Still, I don't look at this and think Starfield's having a problem. I look at this and I go, Starfield's probably about where it ought to be at this point in time. Now, the last chart that I put up here, and this is before I get to talking about the 3 types of complaints I have seen, the sources of complaints and what might be motivating those, is a chart with merely a projected number for the PlayStation Network. Keeping in mind Starfield launched only on 2 networks, well, on 1 network, right, Xbox, and it launched for PC on Steam, which you could refer to as another subscription. It's not a subscription service. And we had 4 million on PC. That's an optimistic number. I mean, I can guarantee, we can guarantee that from the reported numbers we've seen of 235 million sales at the original retail price, we're well over 3 million installations with discounted sales. I think it's 4 million is not a terrible stretch to attach to, and 10 million on Xbox. That if we had similar penetration rates on the PlayStation Network, if this game was released on the PlayStation Network, or when this game is released on the PlayStation Network, if it gets the same type of traction on that network that it does on Xbox, you could see upwards of 30 million plus installations on that network as well. Now, a lot of that depends on whether it's sold for a purchase price, right? A lot of that depends on whether it's part of a subscription service or something like that. If there's some other way they structure it, I'm not going to get into speculating on how that will be launched and what it will cost. I tend to believe that PlayStation is much more of an upfront purchase than what Xbox does as part of Game Pass, that kind of thing. Still, the numbers could be considerably larger. At the end of the day, I think the numbers on Skyrim right now, after so many years, so many discount cycles, and so many versions, are 60 million or something to that effect. There are multiple other titles out there that we've seen that are in the 40, 50 million installation range. And again, the way that the purchase takes place is not the relevant issue. It's whether a player acquires the game legally and installs it and plays it for some period of time. Starfield is in that range, and I can't imagine from what I've seen that there are a lot of concerns on the part of Microsoft, Xbox, or Bethesda when it comes to that. I do have one final chart, and I'll show you this one briefly, and this is in relation to any content creator that pulls up and does the minimum amount of work and takes a screenshot of the Steam negative reviews for Shattered Space and tells you that the sky is falling because 3,000 people have written a negative review. Out of 14 million installed players, that's they're not even 0.1%. Like we could have a whole discussion about the propensity of people who have an axe to grind or a negative perspective and their willingness to go write things online versus people who are happy and satisfied with it, who are less likely to do the same. We could have that discussion, but I think most people kind of intuitively understand that. If you're happy and you're having a good time in the game, you're not out there always telling everybody about how awesome it is. So a lot of people who are enjoying the game are just enjoying the game. So that's where we're going to go with that. So now I'm going to roll into the coverage last night of the 3 areas where I'm seeing complaints, and we'll go from there. So the basic thing I've looked at, and I wanted to give this a couple of weeks. I actually put together a video about a week ago because the kind of negative stuff, what I would call the Starfield Hate Railroad, fired up pretty quickly. And within the first day, we were seeing some things, and I kind of break it out. Into 2 things. 3 things actually. And first and foremost, and I think you just said it there, Zygmunt, which is my experience with this game has been overwhelmingly positive. It has been overwhelmingly positive from the start, honestly. And even though I had some bugs that kind of broke some of the here, what are we looking for here? I want the Fang suit. Some bugs that actually stopped me from progressing in the way that I wanted to progress, right? I guess that's the way to say it, right? So I had bugs early on where like Barrett's quest wouldn't complete, and some stuff like that. And none of that was terrible, because I was able to just kind of move through and go into New Game Plus on that particular character. Just didn't really have any real problems in that respect. Everything there was a workaround for. And so my experience with the game has been kind of overwhelmingly positive. And I went back and I looked at the sales data on the game, and I don't have that right here in front of me. Maybe I'll add that in a chart afterwards or something like that. That's pretty common for me. But this game moved, I think, 6 million units on the first week. And I think in June of this year, we was at 14 million. And I started to calculate some of the numbers, and I just don't see a problem with the growth rate. The growth rate on the game is pretty good, even though people like to compare it with Cyberpunk 2077. And they like to, I'm going to have to shoot. Am I going to have to shoot a guy up here? I'm going to go up to the top. That's Sarah. I do. So even though the growth rate is, I think it's pretty solid. I'm not worried about it really in any significant way. So the thing that I was looking at was, there are three kinds of complaints that I see in general coming out against Shattered Space, or actually Starfield, even back to the start, but we'll talk about Shattered Space. And the first category are from the content creators. And there's some very, very big name content creators out there that have said some kind of absurd things about the game. And frankly, some of them that I've watched, myself for quite some time, and I'm reminded that their experience is very different than mine for some reason. Some of them were talking about finishing it very quickly. I think in the first day, and I'm not going to name their names, although you can go find the examples. There were some of them that were, just coming out and claiming that things weren't in the game that were clearly in Shattered Space. And the one that came to mind very quickly was on X. One of them said something about there not being companions in Shattered Space. And we knew there were companions in Shattered Space if you played the game, right? Like if you actually went through it, you would find them. He was challenged about that online, and he immediately pivoted, kind of moved the goalpost and said, well, they're not the right kinds of companions, right? So the first group of complaints I saw that I would lump together are all from content creators, large content creators. And I don't think these people are dumb, and I don't really think they're really like emotionally engaged in the game either. I think they're just smart and taking advantage of the environment, right? There is an audience, or let's say a subset of game players out there, people, some who've bought the game, some who haven't bought the game, who were against Starfield early on, and they've kind of helped to cultivate that. And so to some extent, I looked at these content creators, and some of them were putting out information very fast, and we're all facing that kind of pressure, which is you want to put something out fast because you want the attention. That's the way YouTube works. That's the way, the money comes in, that kind of thing. And sometimes you get it wrong. And so there's a certain amount of that you can kind of forgive, which is just like, oh, they got it wrong. And you can tell if somebody reacts well when they're challenged on it, or they're shown that something's in the game that's not in the game. Some of them, I think, are just farming the people that watch YouTube that are into the negative kind of hate train on Starfield. And a fair amount of that started, many months ago, a year ago, right? This for better or for worse, let me go ahead and take care of this. For better or for worse, there's been some negative sentiment about this game for quite some time. And, and to some extent, these content creators, they look at that and it's money on the table. I mean, let's just be blunt. They're not dumb. They're looking at it, and somebody's going to take that money off the table. And so they look at it and they're like, okay, I can farm that portion of YouTube viewers that are, they're going to watch. And without getting into too many details, and I don't know how many people watching have channels or don't. I looked through my subscriber list, and some people have channels, some of them bigger than mine. But there are two numbers that matter on YouTube. One is the CPM, which is like the cost per milli. Milli means 1,000, which is what advertisers pay to advertise on a video. And then there's an RPM number, which I think is revenue per milli, which is what a content creator gets. And it's a lower number. But, when I look at all the negative content that's been put out, the videos that are like, we have to talk about Starfield, and Shattered Space is terrible, and it's, Bethesda's going under, or whatever it is. I don't think any of that's really true. But what I do notice is, somebody puts out a video, they put 30 minutes into it, they throw it over the wall to their editor, and they have a thumbnail put on it. And if they're a large content creator, they're getting paid. That's just it. If their RPM is like $5 per 1,000 views, I went through some of the lists, and there's a $2,500 payday for somebody and who's doing a react to video on somebody else's negative video. There's even the smaller ones. You look at it, you're like, oh, that's a $250 video. That's a $500 video. And so the content creators that are doing that, I don't think they're emotionally involved in it, right? I don't know whether they hate or don't like the game, and maybe they have some legitimate, they think they're offering some legitimate concerns, but I think there's an opportunity afoot. So judge them or don't judge them. I try to avoid that myself. I don't have the kind of audience to do that anyway, but I would like to think I wouldn't do it. But there's two things in the content creator space. One is the speed to try to get out there where you make mistakes, and you can back that up and you can just say, I made a mistake. And then there are the people who are just farming the negative content. The second group of people that are complaining are viewers. They're us. I watch YouTube videos as well, but there are people who are caught up in this negative sentiment, this they call it Starfield Hate Train kind of thing, and they've already said something, or they've already kind of taken a public position, whether they're writing comments or they're starting arguments with people, or if you write something nice about Starfield, you say you like it. If you're on Reddit, you probably know about No Sodium Starfield, the other Starfield subreddit and things like that, and there's a lot of that kind of activity that's going on where people are arguing with each other about it, and it's it's almost a political or a religious level debate at this point in time. It's like, back in the good old days, you'd pick a sports team and you'd have a healthy rivalry, and you'd tell your buddy his team was terrible, and you'd still like sit down and drink a beer together and have fun. This has kind of gotten a little worse than that, and the issue I see is there's a group of people who play the game or maybe just own the game. Like when I looked at the negative reviews on Steam, and all these content creators would pull up that little, there's 2,000 people that wrote a negative review. First, that's nothing. There are 14 million players. We can do the math. It's not even 0.1%. It's a tiny number. And we can't even verify that they played the game, right? So there's a small group of people who are already ramped up about this. And I put them in that second group. And the first group is taking advantage of them. Once they're in that second group, it's kind of difficult to get out. People hate to admit when they're wrong. And I just, I'm not accusing other people of some kind of character defect. I don't personally feel I understand myself, right? It's difficult when you come out and you take a public position. You're like, I'm really against this thing, to walk that back. So there's a group of people out there who are complaining, and once they're into the mode of complaining, they're going to continue to complain. It's difficult to, change your tact in front of your friends. They've raised the price of what it takes to actually, to come out and say, oh, I like this game now. It gets harder and harder. And I think those people trouble me a little bit, because if you challenge them and you get in arguments, and I do not recommend getting in arguments with people over a game, they can get hostile. They can, there's ad hominem attacks, and they can accuse you of things. Generally, their arguments are, and this is my interpretation, I don't think they're objective. I think they're subjective arguments. When I see things about the soul of the game and the character of the game and things like that, I tend to just discount those or ignore them for the most part. But the first group and the second group kind of feed off of each other, and they're kind of going around and around in a circle, and we're not going to stop either one of those, right? The only thing we can do is if we find ourselves getting pulled into that cycle, maybe not with this game, but another game, is to kind of take a less aggressive tact and just kind of back our way out of it, and always keep our options open, right? I like to think, and lots of us love the redemption story of like No Man's Sky and some other games, or Cyberpunk for that matter, right? Where it came out and the game was really rough at the start, but over time got better. But if we look at Cyberpunk, I think it came out in 2020, and it was 1,000 days, like 1,010 days, I think, before they released the major DLC that everybody, that kind of turned everything around for people. And so Starfield is about a year, about 400 days into its cycle, and it was pretty solid. I think it was better up front than maybe Cyberpunk was. The DLC pricing, I'm not concerned. Those are all the same. People compare to Far Harbor, and Far Harbor's $25, inflation adjusted, it's something like $32. So there was no problem with Starfield Shattered Space as far as DLC pricing. And for 12 months in, it's in great shape. Now, the third group that I do count in this are, and this is, this is me judging myself in this too, is like people with a legitimate objective complaint. There are problems in the game. These are execution problems on the part of Bethesda. They wrote code, and if anybody's been involved in a large software project or in IT or in something that complex over time, especially something that goes in the hands of consumers, it's difficult work. And I'm not excusing them because it's hard work. They get paid to do it, and that's fine. But it's also expected. There's a certain amount that's almost unavoidable given the complexity and the permutations in it. So there are legitimate complaints. And I think in my Starfield, my initial playthrough and the wrap-ups and follow-ups on that, I list the bugs I ran into. Now, for me, none of them ended the game for me in any way, shape, or form. But it's hard for me to judge if somebody has actually hit some of those and hasn't found some workaround for it, or if it's related to a creation or a mod or something to that effect. So again, three groups. There's the content creators up there, some of whom are just farming. There's the people in the middle who have been caught up into that and to some extent are enjoying it because it's like a political rivalry. It's just an argument people like to get into, and it makes them feel better about themselves that they're winning the argument. And it's hard to get out of it if you get kind of pulled into it. And then there's a group of people at the end who have some legitimate complaints that I think if we feed them back into the Bethesda to the Discord, maybe they get addressed over time. They've done a pretty good job every 6 to 8 or longer weeks in putting patches out there. But at the end of the day, the game is doing well. There's some objective measures, and it always amuses me because in my background, I'm a little more analytical. I see a lot of these bigger content creators, they just pull out this Steam review thing and tell you it's terrible. You can download the data. You can look at the actual monthly numbers. For some reason, they misrepresent them at times. I don't go argue with them, but the numbers are not bad. I think ultimately the only people who really know are at Microsoft or who are in Bethesda, and they seem to be pretty confident about what they're doing. I could be wrong. Who knows? They'll come out. Maybe they come out later and they say that things aren't panning out well, but almost everything they say is in the right direction. Right? They're talking about how this has become the third pillar of their current focused intellectual property, let's say, portfolio, right? When you think about the games that they are supporting and that are still actively making money for them, that kind of thing. So, that's my general take on it. It's profitable to hate. It's profitable to find, if that group's out there and you can make money off of them. I think it's kind of a shame, right? Because, you do see some of those large creators and, I look at some of them, I'm like, well, that guy just put $2,500 in his pocket, and all the people that are complaining and making comments and sniping at each other and things like that, you know what they got? They got nothing. They got absolutely nothing out of it. So that's my take on it. I think, I look forward to the next DLC. I look forward to the patches and the updates because all along the way they have been dropping new content. The Rev 8's an example. I'm still convinced that there's another Rev 8, a Rev 9, or some other version of that coming. I could be wrong. I think there are lots of things that they could do. I think the artifacts that people have found in the game that have to do with space stations or building your own space station and what looks like that, that's all pretty exciting as well. So, if you've listened to that, I'll probably take that section and cut it out and put it in its own separate video. So I appreciate the reminder on that as well. It's a great game in my opinion. I like a lot of Bethesda games and a lot of other games too, but it's real easy to lose track of the longer term context in which even the ones that people think are doing really well have kind of evolved over time. Starfield is it's a brand new game. It's in terms of intellectual property or even time since its launch, it's stunning. It's only been a year, right? And we were just reminded, I think today they started to put the information out on Fallout, that Fallout as a franchise has existed for 25 plus years, 1998, and there's a tremendous amount of loyalty to these games over time. They have been through numerous discount and seasonal cycles. Starfield's going to go through all that. Lots of people who are not playing it today are going to find a good discounted price on it. They're going to jump in. There'll be fewer bugs when they get in, and the game will just keep rocking on as far as I'm concerned. So I'm very comfortable with this. very comfortable with Shattered Space and the new things we've gotten out of it. I still think there's plenty to do. I get a lot of replay value out of it as well. So with that, I think I'm coming up on about the 3-hour mark, and quite frankly, at the end of a rant like that, I should probably just wrap this all up. Thank you so much for tuning in. Just a reminder, I am dual streaming on Twitch right now. I don't think anybody joined over there. Maybe 1 or 2 people joined. I saw them come and go. But I'm trying to learn how to watch that chat and the chat over here. I do most everything on YouTube. That's the best place to follow me, to keep up with any updates on Starfield and any other game as well, because I do post community posts as well. Thank you so very much to Zygmunt and HippieG for joining as members. You're my first 2 members on the channel. It is always a pleasure. And if you like this content and you don't feel like joining, feel free to buy me a coffee as a one-time thing. There are super chats and super thanks and things like that on the channel, or just show up and chat, comment on the videos and share them with people. That's all very cool too, and I greatly appreciate it. So with that, we're going to sign off, and we'll talk to you next time. Thanks. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. I really appreciate it. Remember, simplicity is an exact medium between too little and too much. It is the final achievement, the crowning reward of art. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, subscribe, and get notifications. This is Kinnear, and I'm out of here.